All right, everyone, here we are, series 4, number 4. So lucky number 4, I guess. And today's topic is a continuation of our leadership series. And we are going to talk about innovation and experimentation. And this is a topic I have explored in some detail in other episodes. So please check out the playlist for our series 1 through 3 and take a listen to episodes that you may have missed. So I may repeat myself a bit because sometimes I do that. And also, my great experiment of the day didn't work so well because I've got fuzzy head. So don't rush down the street right before a live when the wind is blowing, because then you have fuzzy head. So in series 4, episode 4, innovation through experimentation. And I have to say, I got quite a chuckle out of the picture I used this week. Is it okay to laugh at your own pictures? Well, I laugh at myself all the time, so I guess it's okay to laugh at my own pictures. And a friend almost spit out his drink when I showed him the picture for today because he couldn't figure out why there were plugs in the carrots and the cheese and what that meant. And while I don't think that an experiment of plugging electricity into a carrot is necessarily going to yield any usable results, the idea is if we don't experiment, we don't innovate. Now, some of us may be brilliant geniuses who can just have ideas pop into their head and they automatically translate to paper or computer, and 5 minutes later, something magical is happening. But for the most part, most of us get inspiration from other things that are happening in our lives or things that are happening in the workplace. And the innovation comes when we have the opportunity to explore those different things that are usually caused by something else that's happening. So for example, we might be working on a product for a customer and suddenly have this idea about some other concept or other feature that we could build. It could be something that maybe it isn't even something the customer realizes could bring them value, and we can pitch the idea to them, and it may be something we then end up building for them. But it also may be something that goes off in a different direction in our business and yields a different revenue stream. So as leaders, we need to create a space for experimentation and innovation. Now, when I talked about this the last time, I had a few people comment, no, but we don't have time. We have to get the products out the door. Okay, that's when we hit the brakes. We need to pump the brakes at that point, because if we had created an environment where there's no time for experimentation, that means there's no time for innovation. And what happens when we get to the end of the road with what we're doing right now? It means our company becomes stagnant. So there are different flavors of this that you can do. I've seen a lot of different things work well in organizations and some things work not so well. I've seen organizations that say, Friday is experimentation day or creativity day. They have different names for it. I see organizations that say, okay, 20% of our time is not going to be dedicated to product development or service development, and we're going to use that for other things. That one often tends to fail, because what happens with that 20%? Oh, we need to have a staff meeting. Oh, we need to have this. Oh, we need to have that. And next thing you know, 20% ends up not being a whole lot of time to do, other things, because it gets taken up with corporate stuff that probably doesn't need to be corporate stuff. And that time may be used for personal development, education, training as well. So you have to keep that in mind when you're thinking about that 80-20. Oh, we'll give the teams 20% of the time to use as they will. Then you can't get in the middle of that and use it. They may choose to use it for development. They may choose to use it for experimentation and innovation, but you can't use it for HR activities, for example, because then they don't have their 20%. So priority is we have to create the culture of experimentation and innovation. And last week, I talked about, is it okay to fail? And I mentioned that failure is one of the hardest things for us as leaders to embrace because it's ingrained in us that we don't fail. And if we show weakness, if we show failure, then we're not going to get to be the leaders anymore because people aren't going to want us to lead. Well, I personally want to work with leaders who are that transparent and admit that they fail, but also encourage others around them to experiment. No, I'm not saying that every day we get up making a bunch of mistakes and we get forgiven at the end of the day and it's okay. No. But we have to create an environment where if we're going to allow experimentation, then we also have to allow for those experiments to not work. And if we actually treat them like we would a science experiment where we have a hypothesis and we prove that out, then we know that some things aren't going to work. So maybe one of the things we experiment with is how do we give people time to experiment? And we let different teams come up with different ideas on how we make that work. And at the end, everybody gives a report out and we maybe go a little bit further with the experiment from the group that proved to work the best. Instead of us just saying every Friday is going to be experiment day. Well, maybe that doesn't work if you have a team that's working on a product with a client and Friday is the day that they're available to work on the backlog or answer technical questions, etc. So you have to be cognizant of how you handle this and know that you can't prescribe it. You can't force it down on top of people. Because let's face it, if you tell people on Friday you will be creative, really, how much creativity are we going to get? Because then you create this pressure zone for people. Oh my God, it's Friday and this is the only day I have to do anything different. And if I don't come up with an idea, then I'm not going to be seen as part of the team. And you can create a whole different unsafe environment by being prescriptive when that's not necessary. So I think the first thing you should do in this type of mindset is talk to everybody. Hey, if we were to change how we worked and we were to give a bit more time to coming up with new ideas for products and services within the company, what would that look like for you? What would feel successful? And then put some experiments in place. Now, one of the episodes that I do, and also I've written about this, I seem to talk about it a lot, is the experimental backlog. So once the teams talk about how do they want to experiment, what does that look like? What does it feel like for them? You know, maybe it's not so structured, maybe it's very structured. It really depends on your working environment. Once you do that, then you have to have some way to capture all of this. And I've talked about idea boards. You can read about that. You can watch past episodes. And then I've talked about what do you do once you come up with your ideas to do the experiments. And you really do create hypotheses. This is what we think is going to happen. And here are the experiments that we're going to do to prove this out. Maybe you start with something that's a little bit what we call softball, where you let them do something maybe that doesn't impact the company product line or product bottom line as much. Maybe it's let's come up with some ideas on how we take breaks, how we have free time, how we have, time to connect with our colleagues, and give people an opportunity to really get used to this idea of innovation through experimentation and then go bigger. We've got these 3 big products we're releasing this year, and we'd like to do some spin-offs. Does anybody have any ideas of what's next? But start small. So you introduce the idea that we're going to experiment so that we can innovate. We want your ideas on what that looks like for you. We're going to come up together with ideas on how we capture those ideas, how we rank order them, and how we start working on our experiments through experimental backlogs, which gives you some accountability and tracking for them as well, so things don't get lost in the shuffle. And then start building that culture. But you can't just go, oh yeah, we're gonna start experimenting. You're gonna do what? People are gonna look at you like you have 10 heads. So again, check in with your teams. What does this look like? What would feel good for you? How would this work? What are your ideas? Because you know what, your teams are going to come up with better ideas than you do because they understand their work environment better. Then we're going to work on how do we track it? How do we decide what's important? And how do we experiment? Now, caution, because I know some of you are going to listen to this, you're going to start writing that down. Okay, Indra said, step 1, we talk about, do not make this decision by committee or death by committee or sink the ship by so many meetings and discussions. Really impromptu, hey, if we were going to do this, does anybody have any ideas? Post your ideas on this wiki page or this share space or this Jamboard or whatever you guys use to collaborate. And then, at the end of the week, we're going to send out a message. We're going to let you upvote, and you can vote on the ideas that you think are good. Make it something that's interesting but challenging, that encourages everyone to collaborate, has a bit of anonymity so the people that don't want to speak out don't have to put their name on it if they don't want to. Come up with that way of collaborating and experimenting and work it that way. But do not make it this big, oh, we need to have a committee meeting, we need to have a working group. Those of you who know me know I hate the words working group because working groups do not work. They don't function from that sense of do not work, and they really just swirl around and get political and nothing gets done. So please don't form a working group to figure out how to do this. Make it more open, let people come to the table if they want to participate in the process, and then come up with what that looks like. Now, when you get to your experimental backlog, that process does need to be a bit structured so you know how to move your ideas through, but no more structured than if you're doing sprints or you have a Kanban board and you're doing Kanban, because all we're doing is iterative cycles of testing our experiments. So again, organize define what experimentation even looks like, not organize it, define what experimentation looks like. How are you going to track the ideas that people come up with? How are you going to prioritize them? Is it voting? Is it rank order? Is it senior leadership making some financial decisions? How are you going to conduct the experiments? How are you going to know when they work and when they don't work and decide to not make them experiments anymore and make them part of the corporate culture and the corporate life, product line, etc., and do that collaboratively. And if you're listening to this going, I do not have any idea what all of this is that she's just pontificated about for the last 10 minutes, please go back and check out some of the blogs and the other items on the YouTube channel to get the actual step-by-steps and the more concrete items that I have mentioned. And if this is really interesting to you, continue to follow along with us on our social media, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Connect with us, comment, ask questions. If you're a bit lost, set up a consultation. I do free consultations every week. And then also consider joining some of our programs. We have several signature programs coming up in the very near future. And in the different programs, we do have bonus sessions about experimentation and experimentation backlogs. So you definitely don't want to miss that. This is going to be a bit shorter episode today because I'm starting to lose my voice, but please check in next week for episode 5. Only 2 more episodes in this series, and then I will be taking a small break. And I'm hoping to convince some of our other consultants in Agility for All to do some of the lives for Series 5 and get a bit of a change so you all don't have to listen to me all the time. But in the meantime, stay tuned with us, and we will talk to you next week right here. Bye, everybody.